Bernard Kelley's father told him one thing when he handed over the seed
I will,
house.
Pa. I'll make
The
them
land
grow
selects the
tall.
plant.
I know
We
you
record
will.
what the land
Our
selected.
legacy is in
We
your
plant what
hands.
survived.
Thank you, Pa.
Bernard spent 55 years doing exactly that. Not because it was more profitable. In normal years, his open pollinated selection yielded less than his neighbor's certified hybrids. He was paying an insurance premium. In 2021, the most severe drought in a generation hit North Dakota. His neighbor's certified hybrid, tested at 47 locations, rated for drought tolerance, averaged 980 pounds per acre. Bernard averaged 1,772. The seed company's representative had spent 3 years trying to sell Bernard an upgrade. After standing at Bernard's field fence in July, he spent the next 18 months deciding what to do about what he'd seen. What he decided surprised everyone,
Look here,
including
the
Bernard.
drought year, only
This is the story of 100 years of
Oh
seed.
my word. And the
And
year
what it knew
before?
that the trial data didn't.
24,650.
A seed does
world
not
of
think.
difference.
It's just
This much is
I
certain.
know.
But a seed carries information. The information is encoded in the DNA of the embryo at its center, information that determines what the plant will become, how tall it will grow, how wide its leaves will spread, how deep its roots will reach, when it will flower, how it will respond to drought and heat and the particular diseases and insects of the place where it grows. This information is not memory in the way that human memory is memory. It is something older and more patient, the accumulated record of 10,000 generations of selection, in which the plants that thrived in specific conditions passed their characteristics to their offspring and the plants that did not thrive did not. In the natural world, this selection happens without intention. In a farmer's field, it happens with intention, or it can, if the farmer understands what they are selecting for and has the patience to select for it over enough generations. Bernard Kelley had been selecting his sunflower seed for 55 years. He was 70 years old in the summer of 2021, and the seed he planted that April was descended, in a direct and documented line, from the seed his grandfather had brought from the Mennonite community in Alexanderville, Kansas in 1923. His grandfather had begun selecting for drought tolerance in the dry years of the late 1920s. His father had continued the selection through the 1950s and 1960s, adding disease resistance and standability. Bernard had continued from 1966 forward, selecting specifically for the conditions of his 480 acres in Dickey County, North Dakota, the particular combination of shallow soil, late frosts, variable summer moisture, and the specific pressure of the downy mildew and the sclerotinia that were the primary disease challenges of the northern plains. The seed he planted in April 2021 had been selected, over nearly 100 generations, for exactly the place where it was planted. His neighbors planted certified hybrid seed, the F1 hybrids developed by Syngenta and BASF and New Farm and the other companies that dominated the commercial sunflower seed market, hybrids that had been bred for performance across a wide range of conditions, optimized for average performance across many locations rather than for exceptional performance in any specific location. In a normal year, the commercial hybrids yielded more than Bernard's open pollinated selection. In a normal year. The summer of 2021 was not a normal year. Bernard Kelley planted his sunflowers in the last week of April 2021, which was 10 days earlier than he normally planted and 3 weeks earlier than the agronomic guidelines for Dickey County recommended for sunflower establishment. He planted early because the soil was right and because the forecasts suggested that waiting would be wrong, and because 55 years of watching sunflowers establish in this specific soil on this specific part of the northern plains had given him a sense of planting timing that he did not know how to explain but that was rarely mistaken. He was 70 years old, tall and spare, with the weathered face of a man who has spent his working life outdoors and who has made peace with what the outdoors does to a face over time. He wore work clothes that were practical rather than new and drove a pickup that was the same. He was not a man who expressed himself through his equipment. He expressed himself through his seed. The seed he planted had been cleaned and graded and stored in his seed house over the winter, the way he did every year, selecting from the previous season's crop the heads that had performed best in the specific conditions of that season. Not the heads that had yielded the most grain in good conditions, the heads that had performed best in the actual conditions of that actual season, whatever those conditions had been. This distinction was the center of everything. His neighbor to the east, a farmer named Randy Schuster who was 48 years old and farmed 1,800 acres of corn, soybeans, and sunflowers, had been planting certified Syngenta hybrid sunflower seed for 6 years. The hybrid had been developed and tested across 47 locations in the northern plains and had yielded, in those trials, an average of 180 pounds per acre, approximately 15% above the historical county average. Randy had been pleased with the hybrid's performance. He had also been pleased, for the past 2 years, to have his agronomist's recommendation confirmed by the Syngenta seed representative who called on him twice a year and who brought yield trial data that showed, consistently, that certified hybrids outperformed open-pollinated varieties. Randy had mentioned the trial data comparison to Bernard at the elevator in the fall of 2019. The data shows hybrids outperforming open-pollinated by 12 to 15%, Randy had said. Across the board. Across which board? Bernard had said. The trial locations, Randy had said. 47 locations across the northern plains. In normal conditions? Bernard had said. The trials represent a range of conditions, Randy had said. In abnormal conditions? Bernard had said. Randy had not had a specific answer to this question, because the trial data he had seen did not segment performance by drought severity. Bernard had nodded and had said that yield in normal conditions was an important metric. He had not said what he thought the more important metric was. Orville Kelley had come to Dickey County in 1918, part of the westward movement of farming families from the Mennonite settlements of central Kansas who had seen the northern plains as an opportunity and who had brought with them, along with their farming knowledge and their community institutions, their seed. The seed Orville brought was sunflower seed, a variety that had been maintained in the Mennonite community at Alexanderville, Kansas since the 1880s, when the community had brought it from Russian Mennonite settlements where sunflowers had been a staple crop for 2 centuries. The variety had been maintained through continuous selection, farmers saving the best seed each year, replanting it, saving the best seed again, and had accumulated, over those 2 centuries, characteristics suited to steppe conditions, drought tolerance, late season standability, and a root system architecture that accessed soil moisture at depths where shallow-rooted crops could not reach. Orville had planted the seed in Dickey County and had observed, through the 1920s, how it performed in conditions that were similar to the Russian steppe in some ways and different in others. He had begun selecting specifically for the conditions he was observing, selecting from the best performing plants not in good years but in the years that tested the plants most severely. The dry years of the late 1920s were his first selection pressure. The plants that maintained yield when moisture was short, that did not lodge when the August wind came early, that resisted the diseases that proliferated in stressed crops, those plants contributed their seed to the next generation. His son Martin had continued. Martin's selection pressures were the drought of the 1950s and the disease pressure of the 1960s, when downy mildew moved through the northern plains sunflower region. Martin had held his variety through both. In 1966, when Bernard was 15 years old and beginning to take responsibility for the sunflower selection, Martin had walked him through the seed house and the selection process with the specific deliberateness of a man who understood that what he was transmitting was not just a practice but a commitment. The selection is the farm, Martin had said. The land we farm, and the seed we plant in it, are the same project. The land selects the plant. We record what the land selected, we plant what survived. Bernard had been 15 and had not fully understood what this meant. He had spent 55 years understanding it. His name was Kevin Halverson, and he was 36 years old and had been the Syngenta seed sales representative for the Dickey County area for 4 years, coming from a position at a crop insurance company and before that an agricultural business degree from North Dakota State University. He was competent and genuinely knowledgeable about the products he sold. He believed in the products, which is different from merely selling them, and his belief was based on legitimate evidence. The Syngenta hybrids genuinely outperformed older open-pollinated varieties in the conditions for which they were designed. He had called on Bernard Kelley twice, in 2018 and in 2019, and had come away frustrated both times. The first visit, in 2018, had gone as most first visits went. Kevin had laid out the yield trial data, the disease resistance ratings, the agronomic recommendations. Bernard had listened without interrupting. Then he had asked, "In your trial data, how is drought stress defined?" Kevin had explained the trial protocols, that drought stress in the trials was induced by withheld irrigation at specific growth stages, creating controlled moisture deficits calibrated to the moderate drought conditions common across the northern plains production region. Moderate drought, Bernard had said. The trials cover the range of conditions typical for the region, Kevin had said. What is the severe end of the range? Bernard had said. Kevin had given him the numbers, soil moisture deficits up to 40% in the most stress-intensive trial conditions. In a 50% moisture deficit year, Bernard had said, does the trial data predict performance? The trials aren't designed for 50% deficit conditions, Kevin had said. Those are outside the design envelope. Thank you, Bernard had said. That's what I needed to know. Kevin had driven away from that first visit with the specific discomfort of a salesman who has answered every question accurately and has still, somehow, not made his case. He had thought about it for 2 weeks before understanding why. Bernard had not been asking questions to be difficult. He had been locating the boundaries of the data. The second visit, in 2019, had been more direct. Kevin had brought updated trial data that extended the stress conditions slightly further, up to 42% moisture deficit in the newest protocols. Bernard had looked at the update and had said, "Better. Not yet where I need it." After the second visit, Kevin had described Bernard to Randy Schuster as a farmer who has his own data and isn't interested in mine unless it covers the conditions he farms in. Randy had said, "Does he have better data?" Kevin had thought about this for a long time before answering. "He has data from conditions that mine doesn't cover," he said finally. "That's different from better." "Is it?" Randy had said. Kevin had not answered. He had driven home thinking about the question. In the spring of 2021, he made a third visit to Bernard's farm, not because his sales calendar required it but because the drought forecast had come out in February and he had been thinking about Bernard's question every time he looked at the forecast numbers. He arrived at the farm to find Bernard checking soil temperature before planting. "You're planting this week?" Kevin said. "Tomorrow," Bernard said. "Soil temperature is right." "The county recommendation is 3 weeks later," Kevin said. "I know the county recommendation," Bernard said. "I've been farming this county for 55 years. Kevin was quiet. Then he asked the question that had been forming since the first visit. "What does your data show, for drought years specifically? Not in general, specifically." Bernard looked at him. This was a different question, and Bernard recognized the difference. "Come back after harvest," Bernard said. "I'll show you the records." Kevin drove home with the specific feeling of a conversation that had moved somewhere new. The drought forecast for the Northern Plains in 2021 was published by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in their spring seasonal outlook, and it was not subtle. The La Niña pattern that had developed in the Pacific in late 2020 was producing the atmospheric conditions that consistently brought below normal precipitation to the Northern Plains. The soil moisture deficit going into the growing season was already significant, the winter had been dry, the snowpack was below normal, and the spring rains had not arrived. The NOAA outlook for the Dakotas for April through September 2021, elevated probability of below normal precipitation, elevated probability of above normal temperature, significant probability of extreme drought in the central and western Dakotas. Bernard had read the outlook in February and had spent a week thinking about it and had made several decisions in March. He had applied additional phosphorus in the fall, because phosphorus availability decreased in dry conditions and his variety's root depth meant that early season phosphorus access was critical. He had adjusted his plant population, reducing the seeds per acre from his standard rate to a rate that would give each plant more soil volume to exploit. He had checked his seed for germination rate, knowing that early planted seed in cool soil needed higher germination energy. Each of these decisions reflected the specific interaction between the expected conditions and the characteristics of his variety, the characteristics he had been selecting for since 1966. Randy Schuster had read the same NOAA outlook and had made different decisions. He had stayed with his standard plant population and timing, as the Sci 3800 management guide recommended. He had applied the standard fertility package his agronomist recommended. These were not bad decisions. They were the correct decisions within the standard management framework for certified hybrid sunflower production. The standard framework was not designed for the specific conditions of Dickey County in a severe drought year. It was designed for the average conditions of the Northern Plains across many locations. The distinction would matter by August. Diane Kelley had been married to Bernard for 44 years and had managed the farm's financial records since they were married, because she was precise with numbers and because Bernard was not and because neither of them had any illusion about which of these facts was true. She kept the records the way Bernard kept the seed, methodically, with the specific attention of someone who understood that the value of a record was in its completeness and its continuity. She had records going back to 1977 in bound ledgers on a shelf in the farm office alongside Bernard's seed selection notebooks. In the spring of 2021, she was thinking about the drought forecast and what it implied for the farm's financial position. She had identified a pattern in the records in 2003, after the drought of that year had produced what she called the most dramatic inversion in her data. Bernard at 1,890 pounds per acre when the county averaged 190. She had gone back through the records to 1977 and confirmed the pattern across every drought year in the dataset. The pattern was, in normal years, Bernard's yield ran 8 to 12% below the county average for sunflowers, because the certified hybrid seed that most of the county planted was optimized for normal conditions. In the 3 drought years before 2021, 1988, 2003, and 2012, each representing different drought severities. Bernard's yield ran 15 to 35% above the county average, with the premium scaling with drought severity. She had shown the analysis to Bernard in 2003 and he had looked at it for a long time. "You've been quantifying the selection pressure," he had said. "I've been quantifying the outcome," she had said. "The selection pressure is in your notebooks." Now, in the spring of 2021, looking at the NOAA forecast that was projecting the most severe drought in the region since 1988, she was thinking about what the pattern implied. The 2021 forecast was more severe than 2003 or 2012. If the severity scaled with the premium, if 2021 was more like 1988 than like the moderate drought years, the premium could be larger than anything in her data. She was also thinking about Kevin Halverson's third visit, which Bernard had told her about. "He asked the right question," she said. Finally, Bernard said. "What did you tell him?" She said. "I told him to come back after harvest," Bernard said. "When he comes back," Diane said, "show him both sets of records. Not just the seed notebooks. The financial records too." "Why?" Bernard said. "Because the seed notebooks show what you selected," Diane said. "The financial records show what the selection is worth. He needs to see both." The drought came the way the forecast had said it would come, not all at once but in the gradual, accumulating way of a season that has decided to be dry and intends to follow through. June rainfall across Dickey County was 1.2 inches against a normal of 3.4. The soil moisture that had been marginal going into the planting season was now measurably deficit, and the sunflower crop that had established in May was entering vegetative growth with a moisture stress that would determine which plants had the root architecture to access the moisture remaining in the deeper soil profile. Bernard drove his fields in mid-June with the quality of attention that drought conditions required. He was not looking at above-ground expression, the leaf curl, the wilting, the color changes that indicated stress. He was looking at the soil. At the surface cracking patterns that told him where the profile was driest. At the places where the surface stayed moist slightly longer after a dew, indicating better soil structure and water retention below. He was also listening. In severe drought conditions, sunflower roots make a specific sound, a high-frequency clicking or crackling that occurs as the roots contract and extend in response to moisture gradients in the soil. The sound is inaudible under most conditions but becomes perceptible in severely quiet conditions, early morning, no wind, no machinery running, as a faint crackling from the soil surface. Bernard had first heard it in the drought of 1988 and had thought it was insects. His father had told him what it was. He heard it in June 2021, earlier than he had heard it in previous droughts. He noted it in his notebook with the date and field location. He also noted that his plants in the sandy loam areas were already showing the specific adaptation his variety had been selected for, the leaves rolling slightly, reducing the surface area exposed to the sun, while the roots, he pulled 3 plants and measured, were already reaching 7 to 8 inches deeper than the plants in Randy's adjacent field, which had reached their standard 5-inch root depth and stopped. The root depth difference was the accumulated gene. It was a complex of genes governing root architecture that his grandfather had been selecting for since the 1920s without knowing the molecular mechanism. Orville had selected for plants that stayed green longest in dry conditions. Martin had selected for plants that recovered fastest after brief moisture events. Bernard had selected for plants whose roots he could see going deepest when he pulled them from dry soil. The gene came with the selection. The selection had accumulated it over 100 years. Randy Schuster drove his sunflower fields in the third week of June and assessed the situation with the concern of a farmer watching a crop that is not performing as expected. The Cy 3800 hybrid was showing drought stress. The leaves were rolling in the afternoon heat, normal for drought conditions, within the expected range, but the degree of rolling was more pronounced than the Syngenta management guide had suggested for moderate drought conditions. Randy called his agronomist. The agronomist drove to the field. The assessment: the plants were stressed but not critically so. The hybrid's drought tolerance ratings were based on maintaining yield at up to 40% soil moisture deficit. Current deficit in Randy's fields was estimated at 45 to 50%. The plants were at the edge of the tolerance envelope. "What can I do?" Randy said. "Not much at this stage," the agronomist said. "The root system is established. If we get a half-inch of rain in the next 2 weeks, the plants should recover. If we don't, at 50% deficit, typically 30 to 40% yield reduction. If it goes higher through July, potentially more." Randy drove to the fence line between his field and Bernard's. He could see Bernard's plants from the road, standing with noticeably less leaf rolling, in the same drought conditions. He called Bernard. "Your plants are standing better than mine," Randy said. Yes, Bernard said. How? Randy said. Root depth, Bernard said. My selection has been going deep for 100 years. Yours is bred for the top foot of soil, where most of the moisture is in a normal year. This isn't a normal year. Can your plants share roots with mine? Randy said. Bernard understood that Randy was making a small joke. No, he said. But they can share seed next spring, if you want to try some open pollinated in a test plot. Randy was quiet. I'll think about it, he said. He hung up and looked at the Syngenta Sci 3800 management guide. He looked at the drought tolerance section. He looked at the trial conditions under which the tolerance ratings had been established. The trials had been conducted at 35 to 40% soil moisture deficit. Current conditions in his field were 45 to 50%. The trials had not been run at the conditions he was experiencing. The data was real and accurate and applicable to the conditions it described. The conditions he was experiencing were different. Kevin Halverson drove through Dickey County in the second week of July on his summer check-in with customers, and what he saw through the truck window made him stop twice. The first stop was Randy Schuster's field. The Sci 3800 was showing significant stress, leaves curled tightly in the afternoon heat, plants shorter than their normal vegetative height, the overall appearance of a crop marshaling resources for survival rather than production. Kevin had seen drought stress in sunflowers before. This was within the range of what he had seen, though at the severe end. The second stop was Bernard Kelley's field. He got out and stood at the field edge for a long time. He had seen open pollinated sunflower varieties before, in comparison trials, where they consistently fell short of the hybrids. He had the data. He had the 47 trial locations. He had the 12 to 15% yield advantage numbers that he had cited to every farmer in his territory for 4 years. But he had never seen what open pollinated sunflower selected specifically for this county's conditions looked like in a year when those conditions were at their most challenging. Bernard's plants were stressed, the drought was real and it was affecting every crop in the county. But they were stressed differently. The leaf rolling was partial rather than complete, which meant photosynthesis was continuing. The plants were shorter than in a good year but standing without the lodging beginning to appear in some of the hybrid fields. The heads were forming. He stood there for what he later calculated was 11 minutes. He was not doing anything during those 11 minutes except looking at 2 fields of sunflowers in the same drought and understanding, for the first time and specifically, the difference between performance within a design envelope and performance beyond it. He pulled out his phone and called Randy. Have you driven past Bernard Kelley's field recently? He said. Yes, Randy said. His plants look different from yours, Kevin said. I know, Randy said. Root depth. That's what he told me. Kevin looked at the field. Can I get his number? He said. He called Bernard from the field edge, still looking at the standing plants. Bernard answered. I'm standing at your field, Kevin said. I came to ask you something. Ask, Bernard said. The question about drought performance you kept redirecting me toward, Kevin said. The data I showed you didn't cover it. I understand that now. I'm looking at your field and I understand why you kept asking that question. Bernard was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. Can I come to the farm? Kevin said. Not to sell anything. To understand. Come Saturday, Bernard said. We'll walk the fields. The drought intensified in August, and the sunflower crop across Dickey County moved through its critical reproductive stages, head development, anthesis, seed fill, under conditions that the certified hybrids had not been bred to manage. Randy Schuster's Sci 3800 entered head development at 55% soil moisture deficit, 15 percentage points above the tolerance design limit. The plants began aborting seed development, the biochemical process by which plants under extreme resource limitation redirect resources away from seed production and toward root maintenance, the survival priority at the cost of yield. Randy watched it happen through August. He watched the heads develop below their normal size. He watched the seed fill unevenly, with the outer rings of the head filling poorly or not at all. Bernard's field was different. The open pollinated varieties' drought response had been shaped by 100 years of selection under these specific conditions, the combination of Dickey County's shallow soils, variable summer moisture, and late season heat. The plants were managing the drought differently. The root system reached moisture remaining in the deeper profile, at 12 to 15 inches, where a clay lens underlying much of the county's sandy loam retained moisture that the surface layers had long since lost. The plants were accessing that moisture and using it, with the specific efficiency of a root system selected for access to this specific resource in this specific landscape. The heads were smaller than in a good year. But they were filling. The outer rings were seeding. The plant was allocating what it had with the accumulated wisdom of 100 years of selections in exactly this situation. Bernard walked his fields daily in August and recorded what he saw. He recorded the head diameter at each of his 20 monitoring plants per field, measured at the same growth stages each year. He recorded the seed fill by visual assessment. He recorded plant height and the evidence of moisture stress. The numbers told a story he had seen before, in 1988, in 2003, in 2012, but amplified. The 2021 drought was more severe than any of those years, and the response of his variety was proportionally different from what he had observed in the moderate drought years. The differential was widening as the drought deepened, in a way that suggested the relationship between stress severity and relative performance was not linear. He noted this in his notebook. He would verify it in the harvest numbers. Diane Kelley had been doing harvest projections since 1977, based on the visual assessments Bernard provided through the growing season and the historical relationship between those assessments and the final yield numbers. In August 2021, Bernard provided his head diameter measurements from the R5 growth stage. She ran her projection model, the approach she had refined since 2003, when she had first formalized the drought year regression separately from the normal year 1. Bernard's field, 1, 650 to 1, 850 pounds per acre. The range reflected the standard uncertainty in her model, which she estimated at approximately plus or minus 120 pounds per acre. She looked up the county's drought year performance trajectory from NDSU Extension's monthly drought impact projections. The projection for Dickey County sunflower yield in 2021, based on current drought severity and expected conditions through harvest, was 1,050 to 1, 200 pounds per acre for the county as a whole. Bernard's projection, 1, 650 to 1, 850. County projection, 1,050 to 1, 200. She sat with these numbers for a long time, because they implied something she needed to be careful about. The historical drought premium in her records, the 15 to 35% above county average from the 3 drought years before 2021, had been established in moderate drought conditions. What she was projecting now was not 15 to 35% above. She was projecting approximately 45 to 55% above the county average, if both projections held. This was larger than anything in her data. It was larger because the 2021 drought was more severe than anything in her data. The pattern in the records held. Drought severity amplified the relative performance advantage, but 2021 was testing the relationship at conditions the records hadn't captured. She noted this explicitly in her projection document. This projection extends the historical pattern to drought conditions more severe than those in the reference data. The confidence interval is wider than in moderate drought years. The direction is consistent with the pattern, the magnitude is an extrapolation. She showed the projection to Bernard. He looked at it for a moment. The notes about extrapolation are right, he said. I know, she said. But the direction is consistent. The direction is consistent, he said. The magnitude will tell us how far the pattern holds at the severe end. Kevin Halverson is going to want to see this, she said. He's coming Saturday, Bernard said. He already called. The Dickey County Farmers Union held a special drought management meeting in the second week of August, and the meeting was attended by approximately 90 farmers, the county extension agent, and 2 agronomists from NDSU Extension. Kevin Halverson attended. Randy Schuster was there. Bernard Kelley sat in the back row in the way that he sat at most county meetings, present and attentive and not inclined to speak unless he had something specific to say. The NDSU agronomist covered the standard topics: current drought severity ratings, projected yield impacts by crop, management options, crop insurance documentation procedures. The presentation was thorough and accurate. During the question period, a farmer named Dale Hoffman raised his hand. I'm hearing that some fields are holding up better than others, Dale said. What's driving the difference? The NDSU agronomist said, the main factors are planting date, variety selection, and soil type. Varieties with stronger drought tolerance ratings are performing better, which is consistent with the trial data. I've been hearing that Bernard Kelley's open pollinated variety is doing significantly better than the certified hybrids in the county, Dale said. Is that consistent with the trial data? The room was quiet. Kevin Halverson, in the 4th row, did not move. The agronomist said, open pollinated varieties have generally not shown better drought performance than certified hybrids in controlled trials. If there's field evidence suggesting otherwise in specific cases, that would be interesting to document. Though it's worth noting that field observations in a single season can be affected by many variables beyond variety selection. Bernard Kelley raised his hand from the back row. My variety is not an open pollinated variety in the standard sense, he said. It is a variety that has been under continuous selection in Dickey County for approximately 100 years, specifically for the conditions of Dickey County. The trial data for commercial open pollinated varieties does not describe my variety, because my variety has not been in any trial. It has been selected for the conditions that currently exist in my fields, not for average performance across 47 locations. The room was quiet. That's a significant distinction, the NDSU agronomist said, with the tone of someone encountering a categorization problem they had not previously considered. Do you have yield data? I have yield data going back to 1977, Bernard said. My wife manages the financial records. The pattern in the data is consistent across 3 drought years before this one. My yield runs 8 to 12% below the county average in normal years and 15 to 35% above the county average in drought years, with the premium increasing with drought severity. You're trading normal year performance for drought year resilience, the agronomist said. I'm selecting for the conditions of my specific farm, Bernard said. Which, over my lifetime, have included drought years with sufficient frequency to make the trade worthwhile. Whether 2021 continues the pattern, we will know at harvest. Kevin Halverson was writing in his notebook. After the meeting, in the parking lot, Randy Schuster found Kevin. He's been trying to tell you that for 3 years, Randy said. He's been trying to ask me that for 3 years, Kevin said. Which is different. He was locating the boundary of my data. Did you find it? Randy said. Kevin looked at the county road, where dust from departing farm trucks was settling in the still August air. I found it in July, he said. Standing at his field fence. Kevin Halverson drove to Bernard Kelley's farm on the Saturday after the county meeting. They walked the fields first, Bernard's sunflower field and then the adjoining fence line where Randy Schuster's hybrid was visible. Kevin looked at both fields with the attention of someone who has come to understand something he had not previously understood and who wants to see it confirmed with his own eyes. The difference was visible. Not dramatic, not the kind of dramatic that made for demonstration photographs in a seed catalog. But real and specific. Bernard's plants standing with more of their leaves active, the heads larger, the seed fill visible in the heads that had passed the early stages. Randy's plants shorter, more leaves dead or severely curled, the heads smaller. Same drought, Kevin said. Same county. Same approximate planting date. Same drought, Bernard said. Different plants. Kevin turned from the field. I want to ask you something directly. Yes, Bernard said. Why have you never entered your variety in any trial? Kevin said. If it performs the way your financial records suggest in drought years, the data would be significant. Bernard thought about how to answer this. For what purpose? He said. To demonstrate the performance, Kevin said. To build the evidence base. The evidence base is in my field, Bernard said. It's been in my field for 100 years. The performance in a research trial would tell you what it does on a research station. That's different from what it does here. But the research stations are where the recommendations come from, Kevin said. If your variety isn't in those trials, it doesn't exist in the official framework. I know it doesn't exist in the official framework, Bernard said. I've been farming outside the official framework for 55 years. The framework is designed for the average farm in the average year. My farm is not the average farm and this is not the average year. Kevin looked at the field. What would you want farmers to know? Bernard considered this carefully. I want farmers to know that the performance of certified hybrids in normal conditions is real and the yield advantage is real, he said. And I want them to know that there is a different kind of performance, the performance of a variety selected specifically for the conditions of a specific place over a long time, that is also real and that the trial data doesn't capture. Because the trial data is designed to evaluate performance across many locations, Kevin said. And my variety is designed to perform in one location, Bernard said. Those are different designs. Both are valuable. They measure different things. Kevin wrote this in his notebook. He looked at what he had written, and then at Bernard. I've been selling one of those designs, he said. And assuming it covered both. Yes, Bernard said. That was the assumption your questions were challenging, Kevin said. Yes, Bernard said. Kevin closed the notebook. I'll come back after harvest, he said. With better questions. Bernard Kelley harvested his sunflowers in the first week of October 2021, 10 days earlier than the county average harvest date because his earlier planting had moved his crop's maturity forward. The combine ran through his fields over 4 days, and Diane recorded the yield from each field load by load. The final numbers. South Field, 1, 740 pounds per acre. Northfield, 1, 810 pounds per acre. Farm average, 1, 772 pounds per acre. She wrote these numbers in the harvest ledger and looked up the county preliminary harvest data from the NOS report. Dickey County sunflower yield estimate for 2021, 1,090 pounds per acre. Bernard's yield, 1,772. The county average, 1,090. The ratio, 62. 6% above the county average. She checked the arithmetic, 1,772 minus 1,090. 1,090 times 100 equals 62. 6%. Correct. She looked at this number for a long time, because it was larger than anything in her records. The historical drought premium, established across 3 drought years in her data, had ranged from 15 to 35% above the county average, scaling with drought severity. The 2021 number at 62. 6% was not a discrepancy in the pattern. It was an extension of the pattern, to drought conditions more severe than any in the reference data. The 2021 drought was worse than 2012, which was worse than 2003, which was worse than 1988. The premium had scaled accordingly. She also calculated, Randy Schuster's Scythe 3800 had yielded 980 pounds per acre. Bernard's yield was 81% higher than Randy's yield. On comparable ground in the same drought. She showed the numbers to Bernard when he came in from the last field. He looked at them for a long time without saying anything. The projection was within range, he said finally. You were at 1,772, she said. The projection said 1,650 to 1,850. The extrapolation held, he said. The pattern held, she said. At conditions we hadn't seen before. He sat down at the kitchen table with the ledger open, 44 years of Diane's precise handwriting, the yield entries for each season and the county average entries and the ratio column she had calculated starting in 2003. Call Kevin Halverson, he said. Diane Kelley sat at the farm office desk in October 2021 and did the accounting she had been building toward since 2003. The accounting was in 2 parts. The first part was the financial accounting of what the selection had produced over 44 years. In normal years, 31 years in her records where the county sunflower yield was within 15% of the historical average, Bernard's yield ran 8 to 12% below the county average. The cost of this underperformance, compared to planting the best available commercial hybrid, was approximately $18 per acre per year at average sunflower prices. Over 480 acres and 31 normal years, approximately $267, $840 in foregone normal year yield. In drought years, 4 years in her records where the county sunflower yield fell more than 15% below the historical average, Bernard's yield ran above the county average. The 3 moderate drought years before 2021 had produced an average premium of approximately 22% above the county average, approximately $78 per acre per drought year. But 2021 was more severe than those years, and the 2021 premium was approximately $340 per acre. Using a weighted average across all 4 drought years that reflected the scaling relationship, approximately $136 per acre per drought year on average. Over 480 acres and 4 drought years, approximately $261, $120 in drought year premium yield. She paused here and made a note. The 2021 premium, $340/acre, is nearly double the average of the 3 prior drought years, $78/acre. This is consistent with the pattern showing premium scaling with drought severity, but it should be noted separately from the prior year's data. The $136 weighted average is used here to account for the 2021 outlier. Using only the 3 prior years' average would give approximately $80/acre average, and using only 2021 would give $340/acre. The weighted average reflects the expectation of continued variation in drought severity. Net financial position over 44 years, the drought year premiums, $261, $120, nearly matched the normal year losses, $267, $840, a net disadvantage of approximately $6, $720 on the pre-2021 data, which the 2021 season's $163, $200 drought premium, $340/acre times 480 acres, converted to a net advantage of approximately $156, $480. The 44-year accounting, the selection had paid for itself, and then some, primarily because of the 2021 season. But that was not the accounting she was most interested in. The second part was the resilience accounting, what the selection was worth not as a yield average but as protection against catastrophic loss in specific years. In 2021, Randy Schuster had planted 600 acres of Cy 3800 sunflowers. His yield was 980 pounds per acre. His normal yield would have been approximately 900 pounds per acre. His yield loss from the drought was approximately 920 pounds per acre, about 48% of his normal production. Bernard's yield loss compared to his normal, in the same drought, was approximately 220 pounds per acre, 11% of his normal production. The difference in drought-induced loss, 37 percentage points, on 600 acres at current sunflower prices, approximately $74,000 in avoided loss for Bernard compared to a farmer planting the commercial hybrid, in 1 year. She showed both parts of the accounting to Bernard. She also showed him the note about the 2021 outlier. The $136 weighted average understates what this year did, he said. It does, she said. But I want to be honest about what the data shows versus what 2021 shows alone. 2021 is the most severe drought in the records. It shouldn't be used as the typical case. The typical case is somewhere between the prior years and this year, Bernard said. Yes, Diane said. And the typical case still makes the selection actuarially sound. One severe drought every 15 years covers the normal year underperformance. The historical record shows a severe drought in Dickey County approximately every 12 to 15 years, Bernard said. Yes, Diane said. The insurance is sound, Bernard said. And 2021 is the year we actually needed it. Kevin Halverson drove to Bernard Kelley's farm in the second week of October, after the harvest numbers were settled. Bernard and Diane sat with him at the kitchen table. The ledger was open. The seed notebooks were on the shelf behind Bernard's chair, 3 generations of selection documentation, Orville's from the 1920s and 1930s in faded pencil, Martin's from the 1950s and 1960s in blue ink, Bernard's from 1966 forward in a compact hand. Diane walked Kevin through both parts of the accounting. The normal year underperformance. The drought year premium. The note about 2021 as an outlier. The 2021 specific numbers, Bernard at 1,772, County at 1,090, Randy's Cy 3800 at 980. Kevin looked at the numbers for a long time without speaking. The trial data shows hybrids outperforming open pollinated by 12 to 15%, he said finally. Consistently, across 47 trial locations. In normal conditions, Bernard said. In conditions within the range for which the hybrids were designed. The trials don't test conditions beyond the design range, Kevin said. The trials test what they test, Bernard said. Which is performance within the envelope of conditions the hybrids were designed for. My variety wasn't designed for that envelope. It was designed for this farm. Over 100 years, Kevin said. Over 100 years, Bernard said. Kevin looked at the seed notebooks on the shelf. Can I look at those? He said. Bernard handed him the notebook from 1966, his first year. Kevin opened it and read the first entries: plant height measurements, head diameter, root pull assessments, disease observation notes, the notation system that Bernard had developed for Martins. This is a breeding program, Kevin said. It's a selection program, Bernard said. There's a difference. What's the difference? Kevin said. A breeding program creates new combinations, Bernard said. A selection program develops existing ones. I'm not creating anything. I'm identifying what already exists in the variety and selecting for it, year by year, in the conditions of this farm. The variety does the work. I decide which plants to save. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the ledger and the notebooks and then at Bernard and Diane. What would you want Syngenta to know? He said. He said it not as a Syngenta representative. He said it as someone who had come to understand something and who wanted to understand it more fully. Bernard thought about this carefully. I would want Syngenta to know that there is a category of variety performance that their trials don't measure, he said. Location-specific performance under extreme stress. Their hybrids are excellent at what they're designed to be excellent at. They are not designed to be excellent at performing under conditions specific to one farm in one county in a severe drought. Something else needs to be designed for that. What should be designed for that? Kevin said. Local selection programs, Bernard said, not replacing the commercial seed system, working alongside it. Farmers maintaining varieties adapted to their specific conditions, the way my grandfather started maintaining his. How many farmers are doing that in Dickey County? Kevin said. 1, Bernard said. Kevin looked at the seed notebooks on the shelf. At the 3 generations of careful documentation. At the records of what 100 years of selection had built. I want to write a field report, he said. For Syngenta's research team. Can I use the data? Use the data, Bernard said. Be accurate about what it shows and what it doesn't show. I'll be accurate, Kevin said. Randy Schuster called Bernard in November 2021, after the harvest was settled and the crop insurance claims were filed. Randy's accounting was not good. The Scythe 3800 had yielded 980 pounds per acre on 600 acres. His normal yield was approximately 900 pounds per acre. The yield loss, 920 pounds per acre over 600 acres, was 552,000 pounds of lost production. After the insurance settlement, his net loss from the drought on sunflowers alone was approximately $67,000. Your sunflowers yielded 772 pounds, Randy said. Mine yielded 980. We farmed the same county in the same drought. Yes, Bernard said. I want to try a test plot of your variety next year, Randy said. I expected you would, Bernard said. What would a test plot look like? Randy said. Bernard described it, 20 acres on the sandy loam section of Randy's north field, where the soil conditions most closely matched Bernard's south field. Bernard seeded his standard reduced plant population and with his specific pre-plant fertility program. Side by side with the Scythe 3800 on the remaining acreage. What are the terms? Randy said. No terms, Bernard said. I want you to have the seed and I want you to see what it does on your ground. What about payment? Randy said. If it works on your ground, Bernard said, save your own seed from the best performing plants and select forward from there. The seed isn't mine, it's the county's. It belongs to the place. That's how it has always worked. Randy was quiet for a long time. Your grandfather started this in 1923, he said. He started the Dickey County chapter, Bernard said. The variety's history goes back to Russia before that. 200 years of farmers doing what I'm doing, selecting for where they are. And 200 years from now? Randy said. Someone is selecting for where they are, Bernard said. Or the selection stops and whatever knowledge was in the variety goes with it. Kevin Halverson submitted a field report to Syngenta's research and development team in November 2021. The report described the 2021 drought season in Dickey County, the performance differential between the Scythe 3800 hybrid and Bernard Kelley's open pollinated selection, the financial accounting that Diane Kelley had provided including her note about the 2021 season as an outlier relative to prior drought years, and Kevin's assessment of what the data meant. The key section read. The Kelley variety's performance in the 2021 Dickey County drought, 772 pounds/acre versus 1090 county average and 980 for Scythe 3800 on comparable ground, represents a category of performance that Syngenta's current trial methodology does not capture. The trials evaluate performance within the range of conditions common to the Northern Plains sunflower production region, specifically up to approximately 40% soil moisture deficit. The Kelley variety has been selected specifically for the subset of those conditions occurring in Dickey County at the severe end of the drought severity distribution, conditions that exceeded the design range of the trial protocols. It is important to note that the 2021 performance differential, 62.6% above county average, is more extreme than the performance differentials in the 3 prior drought years in the Kelley financial records, 15 to 35% above county average, because the 2021 drought was more severe than those years. The relationship appears to scale with drought severity. Using only the 2021 data would overstate the typical drought year advantage. The full data set from 1977 to 2021 provides a more accurate picture. Recommendation: Syngenta's research team should consider whether there is value in extending trial protocols to cover drought conditions beyond the current design range, and in documenting varieties like the Kelley selection as reference points for location-specific extreme condition performance. This would not replace the commercial hybrid program but would contribute to understanding the relationship between selection history and stress tolerance. He sent the report and received a response from the research director 3 weeks later. The response acknowledged the data, expressed interest in seeing the yield records, and noted that the performance differential was statistically unusual and warranted investigation. The response also said, the company does not endorse open pollinated seed programs as a replacement for certified hybrid production. The commercial seed system provides farmers with access to the most advanced genetics available, backed by extensive trial data. Kevin read this and thought about what Bernard had said, both are valuable. They measure different things. He wrote back, the farmer who maintains this variety is not proposing it as a replacement for the commercial system. He is proposing it as a complementary resource, specifically for the conditions that the commercial system is not optimized for. The distinction is important. He did not receive a response to this. He filed the exchange in his professional records. He thought about it for 3 months. In January 2023, he left Syngenta and took a position at the North Dakota State University Extension Service, in the Specialty Crops Program. His first project was a documentation study of heirloom and open pollinated crop varieties maintained by farmers in the state, varieties like Bernard sunflower, that existed outside the commercial seed system and that carried performance characteristics that the commercial system's trial methodology did not capture. Bernard Kelley went to his seed house in November 2021 to begin the selection work for the 2022 planting season. He did this every November, the same work, the same process, the same attention that his father had brought to it and his grandfather before that. He went through the heads he had saved from the best performing plants in the 2021 harvest, examining each head for the characteristics he was selecting for: seed fill density, disease resistance expression in the head, standability in the plant of origin, and the specific adaptation markers he had learned to read over 55 years. Diane came to the seed house while he was working. Kevin Halverson filed a report with Syngenta, she said. He sent me a copy. Bernard looked up. What did they say? She told him. The acknowledgement of the data. The interest in the yield records. The statement about not endorsing open pollinated programs. Kevin's response about complementary rather than replacement. He's not proposing it as a replacement, Bernard said. No, Diane said. But they read it that way. Bernard went back to the heads. He turned one in his hands, one of the best producers from the South Field, a head with dense seed fill across the entire disc, evidence of complete pollination under drought stress. My grandfather selected this head's great-great-grandmother, he said. In conditions like this year's. He kept her because she was the best he had in a bad year. And in 2021, Diane said, her descendants were the best in the county in a bad year. Yes, Bernard said. He set the head in the selection tray and picked up the next one. Randy Schuster wants to try a test plot, he said. I know, Diane said. He called me about the terms. I told him no terms, Bernard said. The seed isn't mine. He insisted on something, Diane said. Bernard looked at her. He wants to fund the documentation project, she said. He wants to pay to have the selection notebooks digitized and archived. He said if the variety is worth what the 2021 numbers show, it should be somewhere safer than a shelf in the seed house. Bernard looked at the shelf, Orville's notebooks, Martin's, his own. 3 generations of selection records. The physical record of what the variety was and what it had taken 100 years to build. He's right, Bernard said. They should be safer than this shelf. I'll call the County Historical Society, Diane said. And the NDSU Library's Agricultural Archives. Call Kevin Halverson too, Bernard said. Diane looked at him. Why Kevin? Because he left Syngenta and went to the Extension Service, Bernard said. And because if anyone in the state system is going to understand what this variety is, it should start with the person who has been asking the right questions. He turned back to the selection work, to the heads that had survived the worst drought in Dickey County since 1988, to the seed that carried in its cells the accumulated record of 100 years of selection in this specific place. The work was the record. The record was the work. He continued. Bernard Kelley went to his seed house on the first Saturday of November 2023, which was his 57th consecutive November in the seed house doing the selection work. He was 72 years old. His hands were slower than they had been, but they were still capable of the work. Randy Schuster's test plot in 2022 had produced the expected result, a normal year, with the open pollinated variety yielding 8% below Randy's Sci 3800 on the same ground. Randy had understood this. He had planted the test plot specifically to observe the variety in a normal year, to confirm what Bernard had told him, that the normal year cost was real and that the insurance was what he was buying. Randy had saved seed from his test plot's best performers. He had done so under Bernard's instruction, selecting from the same characteristics Bernard selected for. His notebook, started in 2022, had 12 entries. Kevin Halverson's documentation study at NDSU Extension was complete. The digitization was finished, Orville's notebooks from the 1920s through the 1930s, Martin's from the 1950s and 1960s, Bernard's from 1966 forward. 97 years of selection records, now in the NDSU Library's Agricultural Archives. The study itself, titled Location Adapted Landrace Varieties and Extreme Drought Performance in the Northern Plains, a case study from Dickey County, North Dakota, had been submitted to the Journal of Sustainable Agriculture and was under review. Bernard worked through the heads from the 2023 season, A modestly dry year, not a drought year, which had produced the expected result, his yield at 9% below the county average. The selection pressure in a moderately dry year was different from a severe drought year, and he selected accordingly, looking for plants that had maintained efficiency under mild stress while preserving the deep root architecture that had made the 2021 performance possible. Diane came to the seed house while he was working, as she had come in November for 46 years. Kevin sent the journal acceptance notice, she said. What do they call the variety? Bernard said. The study calls it the Kelley-Dickey County Landrace, she said. Kevin says he'll use whatever name we prefer in the final version. Bernard turned a head in his hands. Dense seed fill. Good color. From a plant that had rooted deeply into the dry subsoil in June. Call it the Dickey County selection, he said. It doesn't belong to us. That's what he thought you'd say, Diane said. Bernard set the head in the tray and picked up the next. Outside, the November fields were bare and brown and quiet, the end of the agricultural year, the settled stillness before the snow and before the long waiting that preceded the next planting. The seed in the tray would wait through that stillness, carrying in its cells the information accumulated through 100 years of selections in this place. Not thinking. Not remembering in the way that people remembered. But holding what had been selected. Carrying what had survived. In April, it would go back into the ground. The ground would do what it had always done. Present the conditions, test the plants, select the ones that answered best. The farmer would watch. The farmer would choose. The work would continue. The sunflower varieties described in this novel represent a real category of agricultural resource, open pollinated or landrace varieties maintained through continuous farmer selection, distinct from both modern certified hybrid seed and commercial open pollinated varieties. Such varieties exist across many crops in many regions of the United States. The performance pattern described, lower yield than commercial hybrids in normal conditions, higher yield resilience in severe stress conditions, is documented in agricultural research on landrace and locally adapted crop varieties. The specific relationship between drought severity and relative performance advantage, including the possibility that the advantage scales with severity, is supported by research on stress tolerance in locally adapted varieties. The drought of 2021 in the northern plains is real. North Dakota and South Dakota experienced severe drought conditions in the summer of 2021, with significant impacts on all grain crops including sunflowers. The Mennonite community of Alexander Wool, Kansas is real, a historic Mennonite settlement with a long agricultural tradition. The specific seed history described in this novel is fictional. The Cy 3800 is a fictional product name used for illustrative purposes. Syngenta sunflower breeding programs are real, as are the general characteristics of commercial hybrid sunflower varieties described. The root crackling sound described in Chapter 6, the high-frequency clicking produced by roots contracting and extending in response to moisture gradients during severe drought, is documented in the scientific literature on plant responses to water deficit. Bernard Kelley, Diane Kelley, Orville Kelley, Martin Kelley, Randy Schuster, Kevin Halverson, and all other characters are fictional. Dickey County, North Dakota is real. Diane's calculation is fictional. The arithmetic it represents is not.